Feeling Dislocated in Denmark by Beth Ryungu. A different country means a different way of living in community. Preparing my home to be rented while I spend a year writing and traveling was already a heavy lift. Then came the last-minute discovery that the electrical system was on the brink of disaster. The news that almost the entire house had to be rewired immediately almost felled me. Yet here I am. It will take a few days for my body to recover and longer to reorder my brain after the high-octane stress of urgency and weighty decisions. But I am in Denmark, and it's summer, and the weather is perfect. Exhaustion and a 6-hour time difference haven't translated into a regular sleep rhythm, so I'm awake as the sun rises. The windows of the small turret bedroom are open above me, and delicious cool air spills in. I pull the duvet closer and look out over a community of gardens. On the western edge, the tops of the rowans and their orange-red berries are already bathed in golden light, but the sun has yet to crest the buildings behind, so below me, the beech hedge and apple trees are still bewitched in pre-dawn blue. Later, the alleyways where the house sits will fill with sounds of people going about their day, but for now, it's quiet, except for the wood pigeon's perennial lament. My toe hurts, Betty. My toe hurts, Betty. This is where I live when I'm in Denmark, at the home of the Great Dane, my partner in a relationship that defies the standard definitions. We met in our early 20s while traveling in Africa, and then, after an intense love affair, we each changed our bearings, and my ship carried me into wider oceans, while his carried him deeper into the fjords of his homeland. Copenhagen is a city of harbours, and the Great Dane has been in this one, Solhavn, South Harbour, for more than a quarter-century. His house is in a haveforening, a Danish style of community that dates back to the Industrial Revolution, when the Danes began to migrate away from rural living to find work in the cities. Haveforening, colonies of simple cabins, each with a small garden, were built on vacant townland. They allowed workers to grow their own food as they had in the countryside, and to escape the new cramped apartment blocks on their summer days off. Today, the haveforening is such a symbol of Danish everyman culture that, by law, whenever one is demolished to make way for new development, land must be provided to create a replacement elsewhere. The Great Dane's haveforening has a less illustrious history. It was begun illegally more than 100 years ago, when indigent labourers built shacks on the town dump, where they picked through the trash for a living. The City of Copenhagen has long since made honest citizens of the residents here, but compared to other garden home colonies I've visited, there's a distinctly renegade feel. Until recently, most of the houses were built and rebuilt by their owners. Quirky designs feature windows, cupolas, and other materials that have been recycled from the discard piles of a city that seems to be in a constant state of transformation. Walls are painted in strong, bright colours, and there's an eclectic mix of contemporary clean lines and more organic traditions, like this living roof of native succulents over a bike shelter. Tired of lying sleepless in bed, I decide to make tea. As I wait for the kettle to boil, a woman with thick hair passes along the walkway just outside the kitchen window. The shift of her outline is familiar, and I think I recognize her. But it's not the kindergarten teacher I know from Rhode Island after all. I need to reset my inner Rolodex to the community of my Danish life. The walkway is sandwiched between the house and a tidy hawthorn hedgerow, and the paving makes it a little higher than the threshold of the kitchen. To passers-by who notice it at all, the narrow kitchen window set below the eaves seems empty and indifferent. Yesterday, when the evening light made the window a mirror, A young man jolted to a standstill to check his reflection. He flourished a comb from his pocket and pulled it through an already perfect lick of hair as his date laughed as she threaded her arm back through his and dragged him onward, both of them oblivious to me watching from the kitchen sink. If we had reached out our arms, our fingers could almost have touched. The proximity of other people's lives here is another adjustment from my life in small-town America, where spacious, single-family homes are spaced apart by rolling green lawns and double-part driveways. The haveforening has only one road, and the small wooden houses sit next to each other on a crisscross of alleyways just wide enough for a cyclist to pass a pedestrian politely. Windows that face the public path rarely have curtains or blinds, and especially in winter, when branches are bare and the lights are on, family living spaces are open to the gaze of casual onlookers. This style of living makes for a curious kind of intimacy. I experienced something similar many years ago when I worked in the luxury yacht industry. I am fiercely protective of my time alone and personal space, so when I took a job as the chef of a 130-foot sailboat, I wasn't sure I'd be able to share living quarters with 8 other people. When we had guests on board, I was too busy to think about it. But when the seasons changed and we followed the sun on long ocean passages, I learned that intimacy has a special kind of privacy. As we worked, lived and slept in the close confines of a tiny hull on an immense sea, there were informal, sometimes unspoken, agreements that we made with each other. Some were simple courtesies, like leaving the shower clean and dry for the next person. Others were more subtle, like being tolerant when crewmates were tired and hangry. We all agreed to the rules of the ship when we came aboard, but it was the shared agreements we lived by that made us a community. Life in the haveforening seems to run along similar lines. The governance model here is typical of other Danish garden home colonies, with a board and a small staff for maintenance and administration. If this sounds like an American-style homeowners association, it's not. The board members live in the community, and every homeowner has a voice and a vote in all decision-making. A multitude of volunteer committees take responsibility for programs from recycling and green space maintenance to enforcing building codes and organizing 2 weeks of free meals for families with a new baby or someone who is sick. I don't know where I'll end up after my nomadic year of writing, but this Danish lifestyle is appealing. The town, where I live in Rhode Island, like many towns and cities across the US, is experiencing a housing shortage, and tiny home developments have been proposed as a solution. I'd love that. Sell my 1860s, newly rewired 3-bedroom and buy a compact, stylish, energy-efficient tiny home. American HOAs and condo associations have a reputation for being stuffy and autocratic, but perhaps a new generation of tiny house communities will insist on a more tolerant and collaborative culture. With affordable housing hard to find in Copenhagen and price control in the haveforening, there's a long waiting list. Although priority is given to those who grew up here, the Great Dane's daughter has been waiting for the chance to buy a place for 17 years. It's almost her turn, but in the meantime, she and her husband have reconfigured her mother's house into 2 homes. They live on a nearby alleyway, and the Great Dane's grandsons, age 5 and 9, come by regularly to visit Morfar. I also see them on my daily walks, the youngest whizzing by on his scooter to a friend's house, or the eldest with a ball under his arm on his way to the makeshift soccer nets in hope of a pickup game. It reminds me of when I was a kid, when there were lots of kids playing in the street and we were unafraid of stranger danger. As human animals, we're hardwired to respond to fear by aligning ourselves as tightly as possible with a tribe. We can kid ourselves that this reaction makes us part of a community, wear matching hats, and demonize anyone who is other. But fear is anathema to community. The adrenaline response of our reptile brains, fight, flight, or freeze, is designed to ensure the survival of only one person, the self. It has no capacity to love or care about anyone else. I think the strongest power when it comes to building community is curiosity, the old-fashioned kind that leads to taking responsibility personally and sharing resources selflessly. Being curious about the child alone on the street, about the elderly neighbour who has changed her habits, about why the infrastructure isn't working as well as it could. No one has all the best or the right ideas, but when we're curious, we find ways to support each other, and things get better for everyone. It's easier to ignore the alarmists and autocrats when the fear response of our reptile brain is deactivated. We're free to care, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. Rules and laws will only take us so far if we can't form shared agreements for ourselves. We have to respect each other's boundaries, yet come close enough to see into each other's lives with compassion. That's how we build communities that we want to be part of. If you're listening to this story on the podcast, take a look at my Substack, Whole Stories Shortly, to see some pictures of the haveforening. Readers like you join the Whole Stories Shortly community by subscribing to receive new free stories every Sunday. Become a paid subscriber to show your appreciation for my work and keep my creative wheels turning with dark roast coffee and teabirkis, flaky pastry layers folded around sweet marzipan and topped with poppy seeds. What could be better than that?